facilitating transactions in global sustainability and impact business, as well as capital solutions for private companies, family offices, and fund groups. For nearly 25 years, TBLI Group has created a vertically integrated ecosystem of education to action through TBLI conferences and TBLI consulting. More about our company can be found at tbligroup.com. This webinar is brought to you by TBLI Foundation, which hosts educational learning experiences dedicated to a better planet. Through the foundation, we build sustainable communities by sharing the people and the experiences making a difference to so many of our lives around the world. Our weekly podcasts bring impact thought leaders that are doing and not only chatting. Now let me introduce my guest today.
Good afternoon from our studio in Amsterdam. Before I introduce our very special guest and one of my superheroes, Nadine Hack, just for those who've never joined any of our webinars, so if you have to pose a question, just type it in the lower right-hand corner. If you want to clap or find something funny or brilliant, there are 3 emojis that you press down and that will capture that. And if you need to send a private message to anyone in the audience, just move your mouse over their name and a window will pop up and you can send them a private message without everyone seeing this. So today we have one of the most brilliant and unassuming people that I know, who's actually the only person I've ever done a webinar with that actually went to my high school. Nadine Hack is the CEO of Because Global Consulting, and she's going to tell us a bit about her work and the journey that she's been on, which is actually spectacular. And she's often called, or at least I call her, the Forrest Gump of the social justice warriors, because every photo you see in every president or VIP, Nadine Hack is there. Nadine, welcome.
Thank you, Robert.
So tell us a bit about what you do, what has been your journey, and how did you get from Brooklyn to getting Nelson Mandela out of prison to IMD in Switzerland?
So from the time I was very young, I've had a very strong sense of responsibility to others. And some of that came from how I was nurtured. My grandmother taught me that when I bought bread, I should ask the baker the price of today's bread and yesterday's bread. And then she instructed me to buy yesterday's bread and put the money I saved into a jar we kept on top of the ice box, as she called it. She never learned the word refrigerator. So we could give it to those less fortunate than we were. Mind you, we lived quite modestly in an apartment building with her generation who had escaped their shtetl in Russia, then Russia, now Ukraine, just before it was completely annihilated by the Tsarist pogroms. And the second generation of my parents, aunts, and uncles, and my generation, my siblings and cousins. And so I learned from her at an early age that philanthropy and caring about others was not something you do only after you become rich. And in fact, poor people give more generously than far wealthier ones in proportion to their financial capacity. Perhaps that says something about the empathy they feel toward others who also are disenfranchised and marginalized. But another part of it was my nature. From deep within, I had a calling to do things for others. At age 12, I organized a petition signing campaign to keep open a branch of the Brooklyn Library slated to be shut, because I felt everyone deserved to have access to free books. I was drawn to Martin Buber's I Thou, and later to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community, and later to Ubuntu, the African philosophy that we are people through our relationships with people. I just sensed that we were connected to everyone and everything. And my goal remains to help more people discover empathy regardless of how privileged or not they are, and in whatever they do. And as you hinted, I've had a very nonlinear life, having done a lot of things, from being an auto mechanic during the heydays of the women's movement to being the first female executive in residence at IMD Business School, and lots in between, including stints in senior roles at the United Nations, federal, state, and city government, an entrepreneur, a visiting professor at several universities, a trusted advisor to corporate leaders, just to name a few. But the golden thread has always been bringing people together, hopefully to make things better. And I formed my company, Because Global Consulting, a quarter century ago. And its central mission is to create more what I call connectedness, as I firmly believe the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. And through trainings and senior executive coaching, Because helps individuals and organizations connect to their core purpose, making them more fulfilled and, on point. It helps individuals break down the silos to reap the synergy that was bleeding out when people were not sharing information, even if they're sitting side by side in cubicles. And it helps entities better connect to their partners, their clients, their suppliers, and other stakeholders. That enhances the staying power of each. And our sister nonprofit, Global Citizen Circle, formed almost 50 years ago, convenes people of diverse backgrounds from different sectors, ages, perspectives, regions of the world, to have civil dialogue on thorny issues that plague our world: climate change, growing racial and economic inequity, political polarization, access to education, health, and other basic needs. And 30,000 people from more than 50 countries have participated in hundreds of circles that sparked new alliances with ripple effects, some immediately tangible and others we can't even know. And I think of it as a long relay race for a more just world. And while I won't see in my lifetime the fruition of all the issues I care about, I still have a sacred obligation to carry the torch, as trailblazers did before me and others will do after me.
You're very focused on connecting and sharing and generosity. I want to get a bit deeper into that, because I share that with you, but I get very frustrated that people don't reciprocate.
Yeah.
Not so much for me, for anybody.
Yeah. Well, one always hopes that by initiating a connection and an engagement, there will be reciprocity. But I've learned that you need to do that even if there's no reciprocity. I found that it just makes you feel like a better person.
That I had a little technical issue here. So people, they come with their wheelbarrow, fill it up, but don't leave any crumbs for anybody. That doesn't bother you?
If I let all the things that bother me be forefront in my consciousness, I would really go into a downward spiral of despair, Robert. I just can't allow that. I think that the Star Wars franchise has been so wildly successful because of this whole idea of the forces of light, which I call, people who are compassionate and caring and welcoming and generous, and the forces of dark, the people who are territorial and protective, and at the least demonize others, and at the worst destroy them. And what I've chosen to do in my own life is to say, A, I'm going to keep being a voice of light with everything I do. And B, I'm going to amplify the voices of anybody I find anywhere who are doing positive things. That's the only way that really I can get up in the morning.
Okay, but how do you connect people who hate each other?
Yeah, well, that's a big one. My TEDx, Adversaries to Allies, which has over 15,000 views, focuses on how to bring together groups that typically view the other as enemies. And I use an example of one of the early multi-sector partnerships I helped launch in the 1970s. We brought together loggers, environmental activists, the government of California, and community organizers, all bitterly antagonistic toward each other at the time. Remember, this is when environmentalists were chaining themselves to trees. There are many takeaways from that and similar efforts I've helped to develop over the years. In Africa, AIDS activists, the Coca-Cola company, its bottling affiliates, and NGOs to try to work together to fight the spread of the HIV virus. In India, Unilever, UNICEF, government officials, and local community leaders to mitigate against child malnutrition. And I believe that the most important element in each of these is to help individuals and group of individuals experience each other's humanity. Hosting a series of iterative encounters, each a bit more personal than the prior, fostering a safe environment to air differences without attack or vitriol. In the California scenario, it was neighborhood tree planting parties replete with live music and barbecues where they danced and dined with the families of their counterparts. There's nothing more disarming than discovering you have more in common than you thought. But you once asked me if I could bring Putin and Zelensky together.
Yeah, why not?
And honestly, very many bright people have tried, so I don't know. But I do spend a lot of time thinking about how to build bridges among those who are self-righteously hardened in their own worldview. Could I even get a MAGA hat wearing, climate denying, QAnon believer and a multicolored LGBTQ t-shirt wearing, carrying a Destroy the Patriarch poster in the same room without it devolving to screaming insults or far worse? And I look to what I learned from Nelson Mandela, who after 27 years of brutal imprisonment emerged to engage exactly the people who had persecuted him. And I think it would be defeatist to think that we have to be a great human being like Nelson Mandela to do something like that, because I see all the time ordinary people doing extraordinary things. For example, I'm very encouraged by the Bridge Alliance. It's a consortium of about 100 US-based organizations that each of which bring people together across partisan and ideological divides to find common ground and build understanding. And their principles align with what I've learned from decades of experience. Embrace our differences, stay open-minded, inform citizens, collaborate, find solutions. I also follow globally and support organizations like Beyond Conflict that combines 30 years of experience in conflict prevention, resolution, and reconciliation with the latest cognitive and behavioral sciences. After decades of work in Northern Ireland, El Salvador, South Africa, and places around the world where they focus on exposing unconscious bias and believed that changing minds was sufficient, they now focus on much deeper neurobiological and social psychology drivers of change, including identity and belonging, dehumanizing and empathy, trauma and trust. It's one of many groups I admire that work to build bridges and help make peace. But I know, And I'm disturbed by the fact that social media and mainstream media now in algorithmic ways insistently feed their respective observers entirely different versions of reality and inflame hatred for those who believe otherwise. And we see this violence, the violence this leads to across the United States and in the world. I'm horrified at how India's Prime Minister Modi pits Hindus against Muslims and the resulting carnage that's happened all too often. Or how in America, Trump followers still believe that the 2020 election was stolen, instigating some of them to storm the U.S. Capitol in a violent attack on democracy on January 6th. And I truly do not have the answers on how to get highly polarized groups to listen to each other with some modicum of respect. I welcome thoughts from anyone who's joining us today on that.
I jokingly describe you as the Forrest Gump of the social justice warriors because I've seen so many photos with all of these celebrities. How do you know so many VIPs?
Well, I knew these people before they were famous. While Mandela was imprisoned, I worked with the completely unknown, unsung leaders of the African National Congress who were in exile starting in the 1970s. I mean, they were in exile longer, but that's when I began. My work in the American civil rights movement in the 1960s led naturally for me to become involved in the anti-apartheid movement in the 70s. And by the 80s, I was an advisor to the ANC Executive Committee in exile. And I helped establish scholarships funds for the children of their slain leaders. And I hosted events where they could speak to people about supporting their cause. So very shortly after Mandela was freed from prison in 1990, we met him. And hence the quote by Mandela that you used in the promo for this interview, when I was in prison, it was good to know I had powerful friends like Nadine Hack helping me. But similarly, in the 1980s, an opposition leader from the Philippines, persecuted by then President Ferdinand Marcos, had to go into exile. And he approached me, knowing my reputation from my anti-apartheid work, asking if I could help them to support Corazon Aquino. Oh no, another hopeless opposition cause. Just think of it. 66 million voters in over 100,000 precincts spread out over 7,600 islands and more, while Marcos controlled all the media and every form of communication. Yet I just knew it was the right thing to do, regardless of the outcome, as I said earlier. And using my relational capital, I secured the folk singing group Peter, Paul, and Mary to do concerts on her behalf. I helped an organization, I can no longer think of its name, disseminate course curriculum to elementary and secondary schools about this freedom movement. And who knew that in just 4 days, between February 22nd and February 25th in 1986, the People Power Revolution, this hopeless opposition cause, would be joined by Armed Forces Vice Chair Fidel Ramos and Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile, after already the Archbishop Cardinal Jamie Sin and other Catholic leaders had begun the protests. I mean, it was unthinkable. And so fast forward to sitting behind Cori, as she's affectionately called by everyone when she was still alive, facing a sea of Filipinos wearing yellow People Power t-shirts, with Coretta Scott King, the other Cori, whom my husband and I brought there at the new president's request to celebrate her unlikely victory. So, and you know, go further. Let's take the next decade. In 1990, our Global Citizen Circle invited then Harvard Law School student Barack Obama to participate in a circle. I mean, he was a complete unknown at that moment. So all these so-called famous people who I know I befriended them when they were younger and or earlier in their career trajectory, their life trajectory. And there you go. And at IMD, I just distilled engagement leadership lessons that I learned from each of them and from my own experiences into a framework, strategic relational engagement, that shows how by engaging with others, you increase productivity, profitability, sustainability, and at the same time, individual and team satisfaction. You never know where any given relationship will lead you, or, how or what doors it will open.
Sure.
So I just encourage people, start engaging and see where it leads. It, as you said, it may create reciprocity, it may not. But I think that you'll be happier and more fulfilled and have a richer life in doing that rather than just despairing, which I'm sad to see that too many people have fallen into that trap these days. And they're almost paralyzed by that despair. And that's what my mission is, to fight against that paralysis of despair and give the momentum of hope. And, I've told you, I'm an undying optimist with eternal faith. And, it's the way that I get myself up in the morning and do each day's efforts.
But your for-profit, where you're engaged with the corporate sector,
Yes.
from the financial and non-financial sector to
Yes.
to address the challenges that they might have. But if it's a financial sector, their goal is to die rich as quickly as possible. And what you're doing is not, in their eyes, not generating returns quickly.
This is true. So I will go back to when I was based in New York, which is more than 12 years ago. And so this might have happened 15 or 20 years ago. I was called by the CEO of a major multimedia company. I will leave it unnamed at the moment.
Okay.
And who told me, we really want to do corporate social responsibility. And, you're the person we know who's at the cutting edge of that. So will you come in and meet with us? And the meeting was held in the office of the SVP of, I can't remember whether he was the SVP of marketing or, but classic. He had that corner office, all glass with a panoramic view of Manhattan skyline. And because it was a multimedia company, even though this was, fairly early, there were like at least a dozen big screen monitors in which he was like, you could see all their different channels being broadcast. And we had this wonderful conference. And also his office was surrounded like a hub of little, about at least a dozen or more people whose entire job revolved around servicing his needs. And we had this wonderful conversation. He said, okay, now I'd like you to go to the office of the person who's, leading our CSR efforts. Mm-hmm. I said, great, wonderful. Well, the minute I arrived at the office, I knew that with far too many companies, this was a talk the talk, not walk the walk, because this woman operated in a room that was approximately the size of a broom closet. It was windowless. You could just, her chair, her desk, my chair, and a few filing cabinets, and, no room to walk around any of that. And she had one part-time person semi-assigned to her and their sustainability person and their, all the other social good causes. And she was just brimming over with so many fantastic ideas and had offers that were real and on the table, and this company absolutely had the resources to invest in these things, which would, and within 10 minutes of talking, she confided in me, I'm out of here. Like, don't tell them, but I'm out of here. This is a dead end street. And sadly, in the decades since and before, I've met too many either corporate social responsibility officers or sustainability officers, or the person who's responsible for like climate change, and who have like completely burned out in their jobs because you probably know a few years ago that the Corporate Council, which is this consortium, Jamie Dimon and, all the big muckety mucks, they came out with a new definition of the purpose of a corporation. And they made this grandiose statement about expanding from just focusing on shareholder value to value of a broader spectrum of stakeholders. And, I kind of held my breath. Like, is this the turning point now that we've got like these big guys stepping up to the plate? And, no, they're still following predatory practices. In fact, I just watched a news piece the other night about, it wasn't a news piece, it was actually John Oliver this week. Tonight, his Sunday night show where he skewers, and it was just showing the lending practices of and how many people lose their homes, lose their health insurance, lose their ability, and it's all consciously directed in the policies of the, in this case, the particular example that was just devastating was a major, one of the big health insurer companies, and that they, in 98% of the time, they decline the requests. And these are requests for life-saving, children with cancer who, if they get this operation, they're going to live. And if they don't, they're going to die. And, it was just, I could only listen to it because John Oliver was lacing the whole presentation with humor so I could laugh to keep from crying. But I do have to say that my experience of millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, the whole group that follow from like 1990 on, and earlier, the late 80s, but that they seem to have more of a purpose-driven motivation. I just recently read that like 50% of them do not want to form their own entrepreneurial endeavor at some point. 1 in 4 of them are thinking about leaving their job as soon as they possibly can. But they seem to really be more purpose driven. They seem to genuinely care about the environment. They are the activists who are leading the climate change movement, along with even younger ones, the teenagers like Greta and others. Over my shoulder, you'll see Malala, one of my teenage heroes. I mean, for me right now, teenagers and 20-somethings and early 30-somethings are like where I place my hope. I'm hoping that as more and more of them enter the workforce and the consumer base, that they will demand of companies to do what they're saying and to live up to the ideals that they care about. I hope this is true. I mean, I hope that they don't just get swallowed up by the corporate culture once they get into a job. That's the sand pit or the tar pit or that's possible. But I do place a lot of hope in them, and less hope in your and my generation.
Well, I'm not sure if I put so much hope in them because I also see they have a lot of problems on social skills. It's always about the next party, the next thing, the next posting on Instagram, and so I'm not, And I remember Nina Simone had a great quote. She said, "You've got to learn to leave the table when love's no longer being served."
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of people, particularly in the corporate sector and particularly in the financial sector, don't leave the table when love is no longer being served, and they
Yeah.
are not having fulfillment.
Yeah.
Where, this is the message that you should be sending out. So theoretically, if you are successful
Yeah.
with the engagement that you do, people leave their job.
Yeah.
So you're
They leave their job, or, and I have seen some, because this is something I tend to do executive coaching for very senior leaders, but I also coach, the C-suite and board members, but I also coach that level that's like they're the senior managers just below that level, and they've got responsibility for, like, all of Asia for a certain company, or responsibility for all of one division line, business line. And I just lost myself. Oh, what I always say to them, and those who try seem to find it effective, is, okay, so you may not be able to change the entire culture of this, like, huge behemoth of a, multinational corporation, but you're in charge of your division, your team. Your Do what you can, where you can, how you can. Like, the cliche, but cliches are based on truth. Be the change you want to see.
Mhm.
Like, you treat your employees, your colleagues, your team the way you would like to be treated. You engage them, you seek their input on decision-making processes, you become more inclusive, embracive, you broaden out your talent pool, so it's not just the old boys network that your company has relied on forever. And I've seen those who stay, and some choose to do that, and they really do have an impact. And I'm very much a believer in the fact that change is neither top down nor bottom up, and that of course, as a connector, I kind of see it more as a combination of the two. So I like to try to have impact by influencing those who can make top down decisions and impact, but also those who can make bottom up decisions that can be transformative. And, Peter Drucker, the father of modern management theory, famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it doesn't matter. You can create the most brilliant strategic plan, but if you haven't figured out how to engage your stakeholders and actually executing against it, it's just going to sit on the shelf gathering dust. For it to actually become something transformative, innovative, create something new, you've got to get the buy-in and ownership. And that means involving people. That means not sitting by yourself, making a decision and broadcasting it out. And so, again, at the risk of sounding Pollyannish, I have to keep this kind of momentum of hope going, in believing that the little actions of many become collectively, Margaret Mead's famous quote that I'm, going to paraphrase. That's not the exact wording, but it's something like, never underestimate what a small committed group of individuals can do, to make change. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has made change. And I really do believe that. And I really do believe that the sparks that fly, the sparks that flew in that people power revolution, the sparks that flew. I mean, when I was working in the anti-apartheid movement, if you had asked me even a decade before, or even a few years before Mandela was released, will Mandela ever be released from prison? Will Mandela ever be the president of South Africa? I wouldn't have been able to envision it. And yet it happened. So, and he famously said, the impossible is almost only impossible until we make it possible.
I do agree with, I mean, to put it in kind of baseball terms, I'm more of a fan of singles and doubles than these grand slam. And everybody keeps looking for the one thing we do and it's all going to fall into place.
Yeah.
And it's, just people grabbing the shovel and digging the hole and doing the work, consistently. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience.
I'd love that.
Jacques wanted to know, would it not be better to ensure that the people in the middle, the vast majority, engage with each other and so define potential solutions, ways forward? The extremes hog the limelight.
Yes.
And as it is, and drown out the rest of us. Further, the energy required to just get the extremes to stop screaming, never mind come to a shared view on anything, may be better spent on the rest of us.
So is that from Jacques Steffens at
Yes.
So hi, Jacques. Thank you, Jacques. Thank you for that question. Yes, I do agree. In fact, most people are in the middle. I'm probably further to one side, and some of the people I've described are further to the other side. And it is very difficult when you have firmly held beliefs to compromise, although that's something that I'm constantly challenging myself to listen earnestly, respectfully to people with whom I don't agree and see if there's any way we can find common ground. But you're absolutely right that the largest percentage of people, well, actually, most people in the world share a very similar, they want to be happy, they want to be healthy, they want their kids to be happy and healthy, they want to have a house or some form of housing, they want their kids to get some form of education, they want to be able to eat food. I mean, it's like most people just want these really basic things, and then they're happy to be left alone. And so I'd be interested if you have thoughts, Jacques, on how you inspire that group of people who are in the middle to take a more active role as citizens, to say, okay, enough is enough. Let's stop this craziness from the extremes and let's join together.
Jacob had a question for you. He said, Brene Brown said that it's hard to hate up close.
Yeah.
Sounds like part of your approach is bring human into closer face-to-face interaction. What best practices have you found for building bridges virtually?
So Jacob, is this Jacob Hone? You help leaders attract. Yeah. Okay. Storytelling. Storytelling is great, Jacob. It's the way you do everything. Storytelling. It's what brings things to life. I got sidetracked by storytelling. Forgive me.
No, what are best practices virtually for bringing people together?
Virtually.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I missed that. I thought the first question was
what best practice have you found for building bridges virtually?
Okay. So this ties into something you said earlier, Robert, that I kind of slightly disagree with.
Okay.
You kind of a little bit demeaned young people's use of social media, that they're tweeting about what they ate for breakfast. And, in 2019, our Global Citizen Circle had Lauren Hogg, who was one of the founders of the March for Our Lives movement, who was a survivor of the Parkland shooting. She and her brother, David Hogg, are two of the lead organizers. And we had her as a discussion leader at Global Citizen Circle. And she was about, I think, 15 at the time. Mm-hmm. And she said, you old people complain about us always being on our phones. But let me just tell you, the night of the shooting, 15 friends and I were lying on the floor of my bedroom, and we were all on our phones, and we were all texting, and and the next day, millions of people showed up at rallies all around the world. So we're not just, we're doing things. We're doing them differently. Now, remember, they're very different. I started out organizing with index cards in a shoebox, not even a Rolodex. Forget about, anything electronic. A mimeograph machine where you got the ink all over your fingers, a manual typewriter with carbon paper for copies. And that's how we organized the March on Washington, the 1963 March, the 1968 March. It's extraordinary. And when you think about the social tools and the way that you can magnify your message by using social communication to reach out to people and ask them to reach out to people, and in concentric circles, you networks build networks, you can now mobilize huge numbers of people. And just a month ago, we had another Global Citizen Circle with a middle school student who is very well known, the 13-year-old granddaughter of Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, and a high school freshman who was completely unknown but has been organizing since she was in middle school. So we had a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old leading a conversation in which we had thousands of middle school and high school, because we particularly targeted that group for participating both on site, because it was one of the first in-person events we've held since COVID, but also via live stream. And they were very clear. We're inspired by the dream, but we want to make it a reality on the ground. And it was very sweet to hear 13-year-old Yolanda Renee King say, when I started this, I really thought we were going to fix it right away. And I now realize I have to stay at this for a long time. And it was a mirror of what I myself feel. Like, I know in the 60s, I felt like we were going to do everything right then and there. Like we were changing the world, and it was a sprint, and I had to run as fast as I could. And then, maybe 2 decades later, by the 80s, I was starting to think, okay, this is a marathon. I've got to pace myself. I've seen too many people burn out. I've seen too many people leave it totally. I'm in my 70s, and I would meet people when they were 55, 60, and I was that age, and they'd say, oh, I used to do meaningful things in the 60s, and then I became a fill-in-the-blank private equity investor, hedge fund manager, whatever. And now I'm ready to do something meaningful again. And I think, oh, I'm glad I stuck with meaningful all the way through. But I really realized I had to pace myself, and I thought that was it. But then another 2 decades came, and that's when I began to see it, as I said earlier, as a relay race, that I have to play my part. And so these movements that we're seeing, these intersectional movements, which are great. I mean, I'm so fortunate. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and my two mentors who I got to work with when I was a teenager were Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman who ran for president of the United States, but I met her in '64 when she was running for her first New York State Assembly race, and I was a volunteer on the campaign. And the counterpoint to Nina Simone, leave the table when there's no more love, Shirley Chisholm was, if they don't have a place for you at the table, bring a folding chair. Get yourself at the table. And her and Bella Abzug, who was like the mother of the second wave of American feminism. And what Shirley and Bella taught me was that issues of racism, sexism, classism, militarism, environmental justice are inextricably interconnected. What the young organizers of today call intersectional organizing. And I believe that they have the stick-to-itness. Like, it's not just the flash in the pan. It's not just the big, 100,000 people at the Washington Mall or wherever else. They're doing the hard work day in and day out. They're fighting at the level of getting people elected to the school board. Another young woman we had as a circle speaker some time ago, but in the recent past, was like ran for her city council in her city when she was like 18 years old, and they're starting at school board level, at city council level. They're recognizing that it's not just those big statements like your baseball analogy, the knock it out of the ballpark, but it's, get to first base, get to second base, They're recognizing we have to do the hard work of electing local officials who are going to put into place the kinds of policies. We have to stay on those local officials and make sure that once they get elected, they stick to what they believe. We have to go to and walk into the offices of leaders in government, in business, in, every sphere of life, and we have to stay on it. And so I don't think that I think that social has a tremendous capacity. Now, given my age, I'm certainly not a digital native, and I had to teach myself everything. And given my age, I'm way more involved in social than most people my age. However, I really had to teach myself, and it was only in the doing. It was shortly after I created a Facebook account that I was invited to a group called something like Social Media Masters. Mm-hmm. And I asked the administrator, like, why on earth are you inviting me? Like, I'm looking at the posts and they're saying things like, to do this, you need to like install this widget. And I don't know what the F a widget is. And his response to me was, Nadine, social is all about give and take. The people who just broadcast, they're not followed. The people who engage and have dialogue and comment on other people's posts are the ones who understand the power of social to mobilize. And you're a natural at this. Like, you may never know the technical parts of social that the other members of our group do, but you have so much to contribute on what being social really means. So Jacob, I hope that answers your question, but I really do think that social is a tremendously powerful force, both for good and bad. I mean, we've seen how horrible things are perpetrated through social.
Mm-hmm. Meg wanted to ask, it's a short question, but she had a nice comments here. So your question, Nadine, how do we deal with the extremism not getting discouraged? I take some serious hope from history. I live in Annapolis, scene of the crime with our Civil War, now with my grands play at the city docks, scene of the former slave market. Oh. The mother is African. We now have ice cream there, just as you noted with the Northern Ireland situation in our lifetimes. Recall the successes, nourish ourselves with those, not denying in the reality, but well, maybe, or just maybe, a rainbow MAGA hat is possible, or maybe not.
Please, God. Is it Megan?
Meg Brindell.
Hi, Meg. I don't see you on the screen, so I don't, but thank
Just
you for.
press on comments or people at the top.
Yeah, I did, but it was too much of a search and I didn't want to get distracted.
It's
So,
okay.
Meg, like you, I would love to see a rainbow MAGA hat. Like that's my dream. That's the world I want to live in. Recently, I was reflecting with my husband. I don't know if you know the a cappella singing group Sweet Honey and the Rock, but I know them well. In 1985, I organized the closing unity rally at the what was then the end of the decade on women conference. It was 10 years before Beijing. Beijing was the follow-up. And we organized it because the media was mainly carrying stories about how all the women were bickering with each other. And we were horrified by that because it was like amazing to be on the campus of Nairobi University where Maasai women were sitting in circles under trees with Japanese anti-nuclear activists in their flowing gowns next to Americans in their T-shirts and jeans. I mean, it was really quite remarkable. And Sweet Honey and the Rock, I got them to perform at that closing unity rally, which was wonderful. And I had speakers from all the different parts of the world. And we then started going every year, my husband and I, to the Sweet Honey and the Rock concert that was held annually at Carnegie Hall in New York. And if you've ever been to a Sweet Honey and the Rock concert, it's the most integrated audience you will ever experience. It's black, it's white, it's brown, it's yellow, it's every race, it's gay, it's straight, it's couples, it's families, and every time we would go, I would say to my husband, Jerry, this is what I want my Congress to look like. This is what I want my nation to look like. This is where I want to live. I want to live in a Sweet Honey and the Rock concert. So, Meg, yes, I very much hope, like you, I've got grandchildren, and I would like and dream about a world in which we can create more harmony, and I think by dreaming about it, working for it, helping others, motivating others to do the same, that we bring ourselves closer to the possibility of that happening, recognizing that there will always be people who are trying to move us backwards, back to what they call the good old days, which are the days of the slave block, the days of, there were no good old days, where I could not have been the executive in residence at IMD Business School in the 1970s. In fact, recently, someone was rummaging through a vintage shop and came across a early Rolling Stone magazine, and they saw a picture and they said, "Oh, this has to be Nadine." And sure, and they scanned it and emailed it to me, and I said, "Yes, it was." And they bought it and they sent it to me, and I've got it. And I posted it on Facebook because I'm holding up a sign. I'm in a political street theater troupe at the time, and I'm holding up a sign: "Women are not sex objects." And I got a whole slew of comments from young women and men saying, "Oh no, nothing's changed. You could be holding that sign today." And I said, No. Believe me, I wish we were further along now than we are. However, we are not where we were then. Like, just watch one episode of Mad Men. And for those of you who are not from America, it's an amazing series on advertising executives in the 60s on Madison Avenue. And they're misogynistic and they're racist and they're disgusting. And, and I just could not have done that in 1970. But because of what people like Shirley Chisholm and Bella Abzug did, and whenever people would say to me, "Oh, I like your kind of feminist better, you're kind of softer," and I say, "Don't say that. Like, I couldn't be if Bella wasn't. Like, Bella had to be a bull in the china cabin because she had to, like, break through brick walls. And I've had to break through brick walls. I've been the first woman in many things. And I can only imagine that the only thing that would be harder would have been the first woman of color. So I just happened to have been born with white skin and blue eyes, it's been hard enough. And I can only imagine if my skin tone were darker, how much harder it would be. And every time I was in one of those situations where it was the first, I would walk into a room and the men who were in the room generally thought I was the woman there to pour the coffee. And I had to over and over assert my authority, my agency, my autonomy. And that's a lot of what I do when I'm coaching people, whether they're women or men, is, hold on to yourself. Know your value. Even, going back to your point, Robert, on reciprocity, even if nobody else sees it, even if your boss doesn't recognize it, even if your peer, you hold on. You know your value. Don't let anybody else define you. You hold on and you enter the room knowing who you are, knowing what you bring, and feeling confident in that. And it's their loss if they can't see it.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. We're coming toward the close of the hour. What can this audience that's watching now live, and most who will watch the replay or multiple times, what can we do to help you?
Well, I'm now writing a book called The Power of Connectedness. I'm on a sabbatical. I'm not taking on consulting work. I'm not taking on any new coaching clients. I've got a few who are longtime clients who I'm not going to abandon, but I'm writing. I'm doing talks like this because talking about connectedness is helping me think about connectedness, is helping me I've written thousands of articles, but now I'm distilling it down to a book. So if you have a story that you'd like to share, I'm very accessible. I'm Nadine Hack on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram. So whatever you use, I'm not going to give you my personal email, but my company email is admin@because.net. The website is because.net. You can write to my assistant at admin@because.net. She's not going to necessarily get back to you very quickly because she knows I'm guarding my time very zealously. But between either communicating with me on one of the social platforms or writing to my admin assistant, if you have something to contribute to this grand story of why making connections are important and the challenges to doing that and how you might have overcome some of those challenges, I welcome it, and I will feature you and give you attribution because I'm very non-territorial.
That's very true. Nadine is one of the most generous people I know, almost shockingly generous, and I admire the fact that you're not saying what's in it for me. I never heard you ever say that to anyone. What's in it for me? You're just completely accessible and generous. I'd like to take a group selfie before
Please, I'd love that.
And I'll send the link of Because so people can look there. So let's just try a group selfie, see if this works, and just wave to the camera. Nadine, you're brilliant. Thank you so much for reminding me, forget about the reciprocity and hold on to the value that we all have. I want to thank our entire production crew for making this webinar possible. Sam, our producer, crypto genius and ramen critic. Ricky, my absolute better half with no filter. Xi Jinping, our head of transparency and integrity. Vladimir Putin, the president of Mother Teresa School of Compassion, Elon Musk, our humility coach, Donald Trump, our Zen master, and Gerhard Schroeder, the global head of neutrality training. So I want to thank you all. For those that want, I'm going to run a short mixer or 3 rounds. If you want to stay, you're more than welcome. Nadine, you're more than welcome. And if there's anything we can do to help you, I will put that also in the end mailing that you're about to writing a book and people can share, because some people did want to help you on that.
Sure. And I saw that people like Lubna wanted to take the mic. So if Lubna is still with us and stays, I'll stay on for a little bit.
Okay, we're going to go right into the okay, got it. Into the thing, yes. Okay, and we're going to render the photo, and let me just go here. Okay. thank you all very, very much for coming. And thank you especially to Nadine. You were brilliant. I'll send you all a link to her company, and I'll also send everyone a replay. Tomorrow, the first Friday of every month at 5 p.m. Amsterdam time, CEST, we hold our monthly mixer. So you just click on the link at the time and you come right in. No one giving speeches or anything. You don't have to register, and you can join, and there'll be probably about 10 rounds. Hopefully we'll get a large turnout of a couple hundred people. Tell your friends, share the link with as many people as you like. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon. Thanks again.